The Billionaire's Final Gambit, a love story that conquered death. What if I told you that a single moment of clumsiness could save a man's life, expose the deadliest family betrayal in corporate history, and become the greatest love story ever told? You're about to discover how a waitress from Boston's roughest neighborhood uncovered a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of power, saved a billion-dollar empire from destruction, and found a love so powerful it literally brought a dead man back to life. Stay with me, because this story will restore your faith in the impossible and prove that love truly can conquer anything, even death itself. The crystal decanter slipped from Jonathan Sterling's trembling fingers, exploding against the polished marble floor of his penthouse overlooking Boston Harbor. Shards of glass scattered like diamonds across the room, mixing with the amber whiskey in abstract patterns that reminded him, oddly, of blood. The sound echoed through the 42nd floor like a gunshot, but Jonathan barely heard it over the roaring in his ears. His reflection in the floor-to-ceiling windows showed a man the world feared and respected, sharp cheekbones carved from granite, steel-gray eyes that had stared down presidents and prime ministers, a jaw that could cut glass. At 36, Jonathan Sterling commanded a real estate and technology empire that spanned 6 continents, with a personal worth that exceeded the GDP of small nations. The Sterling name was synonymous with power, innovation, and an almost supernatural ability to turn vision into reality. But tonight, staring at his reflection against the glittering Boston skyline, Jonathan felt like a fraud, a dying fraud. The diagnosis had shattered his world 3 months ago, delivered in the sterile white office of Boston's most exclusive medical facility, Dr. Marcus Richardson, Harvard Medical School's most celebrated neurologist, had spoken the words with the clinical detachment of a man who'd delivered thousands of death sentences. Aggressive neurodegenerative disease. Rapid progression. 18 months if you're fortunate. Possibly less if the deterioration accelerates as we expect it will. Jonathan had built his empire on the principle that everything had a price, every problem had a solution, every obstacle could be overcome with enough money, intelligence, or determination. But death, he was learning, was the ultimate non-negotiable contract. The episodes were becoming impossible to hide. What had started as occasional dizzy spells 3 months ago had escalated into full blackouts that left him unconscious for minutes at a time. His hands shook when he thought no one was looking. Words sometimes fled from his tongue mid-sentence, leaving him grasping for thoughts that seemed to dissolve like smoke. His assistant, Rebecca, had started scheduling meetings in smaller blocks, creating elaborate cover stories for his absences. The board of directors was beginning to ask questions. In the ruthless ecosystem of Boston's financial district, weakness was a death sentence. Jonathan had seen it happen to others, titans of industry reduced to whispers and footnotes once the shark smelled blood in the water. His empire, built over 15 years of 18-hour days and calculated risks, could crumble in 18 months if he didn't take action. His phone buzzed against the marble surface of his desk. A text message from his half-brother, Trevor. Heard about another episode at the Beacon Hill project. Getting worried about you, brother. Maybe it's time to consider stepping back. Let someone with a clearer head take charge. Trevor Sterling, charming, ambitious, and hungry for power in a way that reminded Jonathan of a well-dressed predator. They shared a father but had never shared anything else that mattered. While Jonathan had sacrificed everything to build Sterling Industries into a global powerhouse, Trevor had glided through life on charisma and the family name. He'd never created anything, never risked anything, never earned the right to inherit what Jonathan had built. But if Jonathan died without an heir, Trevor would inherit everything by default. The thought made Jonathan's chest tighten with something beyond physical pain. Trevor would dismantle the empire within 5 years, selling off pieces to the highest bidder until nothing remained but a name on outdated business cards. That's when Jonathan made the decision that would change two lives forever. He needed an heir, and he needed one before his deteriorating condition made it impossible. Not through some clinical arrangement with a surrogate, but something real. Someone who could understand the weight of the Sterling legacy and carry it forward with integrity. He'd tried the conventional route, society daughters and ambitious heiresses who saw him as either a conquest or a transaction. What he needed was someone different, someone real, someone with the strength to build something lasting and the character to protect it. The charity gala at the Four Seasons was supposed to be Jonathan's final public appearance before announcing his medical leave. He moved through the crowd of Boston's elite like a man underwater, his practiced smile hiding the constant battle against nausea and disorientation. Crystal chandeliers cast prismatic light across the sea of designer gowns and perfectly tailored tuxedos. These were his people, supposedly, titans of industry, political power brokers, old money families whose names graced hospital wings and university buildings. But tonight, they felt like strangers. The diagnosis had created an invisible wall between Jonathan and the world he'd conquered. These people weren't his peers anymore. They were just beautiful ghosts in a life he was being forced to leave behind. He was making his way toward the exit, his vision starting to blur at the edges, when the universe exploded in a symphony of shattered glass and spilled wine. The collision was spectacular. A waiter carrying a full tray of Burgundy had somehow materialized directly in Jonathan's path, and the impact sent 24 wine glasses cascading to the marble floor in a crimson avalanche. The sound was like a crystal bomb detonating, drawing every eye in the ballroom to the epicenter of destruction. Standing in the midst of the chaos was a young woman who looked like she wanted the earth to open and swallow her whole. She wore the standard black uniform of the catering staff, but something about her immediately set her apart from the other servers. Maybe it was the way she carried herself, straight-backed, despite her obvious mortification, or the fierce intelligence that blazed in her dark brown eyes as she assessed the damage. "Oh God, I'm so sorry," she said, her voice carrying the slight accent of someone who'd grown up in South Boston. "I didn't see you there. Are you hurt?" "Did any of the glass get you?" Jonathan looked down at his wine-stained shirt, easily worth more than most people's monthly rent, and felt something he hadn't experienced in months. He started laughing. Not the polite chuckle he deployed at board meetings or charity functions, but genuine, uncontrolled laughter that rose from somewhere deep in his chest. The woman stared at him like he'd lost his mind, which, Jonathan reflected, might not be far from the truth. "You're not angry?" she asked, already kneeling to collect the larger pieces of glass with her bare hands. "Most people wearing suits that cost more than my car would be screaming for my head right now. Most people wearing suits this expensive have forgotten what it feels like to clean up their own mistakes," Jonathan replied, surprising himself by kneeling beside her to help. "And what's your name?" "Emma Chen," she said, pausing in her glass gathering to study his face. "And you're Jonathan Sterling, which means I just destroyed your evening and possibly my entire career in one magnificent crash." Jonathan found himself smiling, actually smiling, for the first time since his diagnosis. "You didn't destroy anything, Emma. If anything, you just made this the most interesting 30 seconds I've had in months." Emma's laugh was like music, unguarded and real in a way that cut through the artificial atmosphere of the gala like a knife. "Well, when you put it that way, maybe I should make a habit of destroying expensive events." As they worked together to clear the broken glass, their hands brushed against each other, and Jonathan felt something electric pass between them. It was more than attraction, though Emma was beautiful in an understated way that made the society women around them look like elegant mannequins. It was recognition, as if some part of his soul had been waiting for this moment without knowing it. "Can I buy you coffee sometime?" Jonathan heard himself asking. Somewhere with fewer breakable objects around. Emma rocked back on her heels, studying him with those intelligent dark eyes. "I don't think I'm exactly your usual type, Mr. Sterling." "You'd be surprised how much my usual type has changed recently," Jonathan said, and he meant every word. Looking at Emma, seeing her strength, her honesty, the way she faced disaster with humor instead of hysteria, he felt something stir in his chest that had nothing to do with his medical condition. As Emma returned to her duties and the gala crowd found other entertainment, Jonathan remained rooted to the spot where they'd knelt together among the broken glass. He watched her move through the ballroom with the efficient grace of someone who'd learned to be invisible while seeing everything. She was kind to the other staff members, patient with demanding guests, utterly professional despite the earlier accident. His phone buzzed. Trevor, naturally. "I saw your wine bath on someone's Instagram story. Losing coordination already. How long before you're drooling in a wheelchair, brother?" Jonathan deleted the message without reading it twice, but the words hit their target. The neurologist had been explicit about the progression of his condition. Motor control would deteriorate first, then cognitive function, then... Jonathan pushed the thought away. He didn't have time for self-pity. He had maybe 18 months to secure his legacy, and Emma Chen had just shown him what he'd been looking for without realizing it. She wasn't like the women who usually orbited his world, women who saw dollar signs when they looked at him, who calculated net worth before asking his name. Emma was real. She was strong. She had faced catastrophe with grace and humor, and something about her made him feel more human than he had in years. As the evening wound down, Jonathan made his decision. He would find Emma Chen again, and he would make her an offer that would change both their lives forever. Not because he was desperate, though he was, but because for the first time since his diagnosis, he'd found someone who made him want to fight for whatever time he had left. 3 days later, Jonathan sat in the office of his private investigator, reading a file that made his chest ache with something he hadn't felt in years: genuine respect. Emma Chen, 25 years old, had been supporting her family single-handedly since her father's construction accident left him permanently disabled 2 years ago. She worked 3 jobs: morning shifts at a downtown diner called Murphy's Corner, evening catering gigs, and overnight data entry work she could do from home while caring for her father. Her younger sister Lucy was a senior at Boston Latin, one of the city's most competitive public schools, and her grades suggested a full scholarship to any college in the country was within reach. Emma had no criminal record, no debt beyond the mortgage on the modest house in Southie where she'd grown up, and no scandals hiding in her past. The investigator had included photos of Emma walking Lucy to school, both sisters laughing at something on Lucy's phone, and another of Emma helping her father with his physical therapy exercises in their small living room. Jonathan studied the images with the intensity he usually reserved for billion-dollar acquisition deals. This was what family looked like. Not board meetings and hostile takeovers, but quiet moments of sacrifice and shared burdens. Emma wasn't just supporting her family. She was holding them together through pure force of will. The investigator had also noted something that made Jonathan's pulse quicken. Emma was taking business classes at night at a local community college, slowly working toward a degree in management. She had dreams beyond serving tables and cleaning up other people's messes. She had ambition tempered by loyalty, intelligence coupled with integrity. She was perfect. Jonathan found her at Murphy's Corner the next afternoon, a no-frills diner in the heart of South Boston that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 1980s. The floor was checkered linoleum, the booths were cracked vinyl, and the air smelled like coffee, bacon grease, and working-class determination. Emma was behind the counter, somehow managing to juggle 6 different orders while keeping up a running conversation with a regular customer who looked old enough to remember when the neighborhood was still mostly Irish. When she saw Jonathan walk through the door, her expression shifted through surprise, confusion, and something that might have been embarrassment that he was seeing her real world. "Jonathan Sterling in Murphy's Corner," she said, setting down the coffee pot and wiping her hands on her apron. "That's not something you see every day. Let me guess. You're lost." "Not lost," Jonathan said, sliding onto a stool at the counter. "Just discovering there's more to Boston than I thought. Coffee. Coming up." "Blackie, I'm guessing." "You guessed correctly." Emma poured his coffee with the efficient movements of someone who'd done this thousands of times. "So what brings you to our little corner of the world, slumming it with the working class?" There was no malice in her voice, but Jonathan heard the defensive edge that suggested she'd dealt with condescending rich people before. "Actually, I came to see you." "Me?" Emma's eyebrows shot up. "Why?" "Because I have a proposition for you, and before you start worrying, it's not what you think." Emma glanced around the diner, noting the curious looks from other customers. "My break's in 10 minutes. You buying coffee or just taking up counter space?" "Both, apparently." 10 minutes later, they sat in a corner booth while Emma nursed a Coke, and Jonathan gathered the courage for the most important conversation of his life. "I investigated your situation, Emma. I know about your father, your sister, the 3 jobs. You're drowning, but you're too proud to admit it." Emma's expression hardened, her dark eyes flashing with anger. "You had no right to dig into my life. What do you want?" Jonathan leaned forward, his grey eyes intense. "I want to make you an offer. Marry me. Give me a child. In return, I'll ensure that you and your family never have to worry about money again. Lucy's college, your father's medical bills, a house, financial security for life." The words hung in the air between them like a physical presence. Emma stared at him for a long moment, her Coke forgotten on the table. "You're serious," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "You're actually serious. Dead serious. I'm running out of time, Emma. I need someone I can trust. Someone real. That's you." Emma laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You don't even know me. I spill wine on you and suddenly you want to marry me and have children. This isn't a Hallmark movie, Jonathan. This is insane." "Maybe it is insane," Jonathan admitted. "But look at your life. You're 25, and you haven't had a single day just for yourself since your father's accident. Lucy deserves better than watching her sister work herself to death." "I can change that." "You think you can just buy me?" Emma's voice was sharp with hurt and anger. "This isn't about buying you," Jonathan said, his voice softening. "I saw you the other night. Your strength, your grace under pressure. You're not like anyone I've ever met. I don't just need an heir, Emma, I need you." For a moment, their eyes met across the table, and Jonathan saw something flicker in hers. Not love, not yet, but recognition. She'd felt it too, that electric moment when their hands had touched among the broken glass. "You don't know what you're asking," Emma said, her voice trembling slightly. "I have responsibilities. Lucy's applying to colleges. My father needs constant care. I can't just abandon them." "I'm not asking you to abandon anyone," Jonathan said quietly. "I'm asking you to save them. And maybe, if you'll let me, I'm asking you to save me too." Emma's breath caught at the raw honesty in his voice. "What do you mean?" Jonathan was quiet for a long moment, wrestling with how much to reveal. The diagnosis was his most closely guarded secret, known only to his doctor and himself. But something about Emma's steadfast gaze made him want to tell her everything. "I'm sick, Emma. Terminally sick. The doctors gave me 18 months, maybe less. I need an heir because when I'm gone, everything I've built goes to my half-brother Trevor, and he'll destroy it all within 5 years. The words hit Emma like a physical blow. She'd expected many things from this conversation, but not this stark honesty. not this glimpse of vulnerability from a man the world saw as invincible. "What kind of sick?" she asked gently. "Neurodegenerative disease. It'll get worse over time. Eventually, I'll lose motor control, then cognitive function, then—" He couldn't finish the sentence. Emma reached across the table and covered his hand with hers, feeling the slight tremor he was trying to hide. "Jonathan, I'm so sorry." "I don't want your pity," he said quickly. "I want your partnership. I want to know that something good will come from my life, that my name won't die with me. What happens to me and the baby after you're gone? You'll be taken care of. The child will inherit everything. Trevor gets nothing. And until then?" Jonathan turned his hand palm up, intertwining their fingers. "Until then, we try to make the best of whatever time we have. I won't pretend this is a fairy tale, Emma, but it doesn't have to be just a business arrangement either." Emma felt the weight of decision pressing down on her like a physical force. This man was offering her family a life beyond anything she'd dared to dream. But more than that, she found herself genuinely drawn to him, not just his wealth and power, but his intelligence, his unexpected vulnerability, the way he'd laughed instead of exploding when she'd ruined his evening. "If I say yes," she said slowly, "I want complete honesty, no lies, no secrets. If we're going to do this, we do it with everything on the table." Jonathan nodded, relief flooding his features. "Everything. I promise." Emma took a deep breath, knowing she was about to change her life forever. "Then yes, Jonathan Sterling, I'll marry you." The wedding took place 3 weeks later, in a small chapel overlooking Boston Harbor. Emma wore an elegant ivory dress that had belonged to Jonathan's mother, a gesture that surprised her with its intimacy. Lucy stood as her maid of honor, looking simultaneously awed and worried in a new dress that probably cost more than their monthly grocery budget. Emma's father sat in the front row, his wheelchair decorated with white ribbons, tears streaming down his weathered face. The guest list was small but significant. Jonathan's assistant Rebecca was there, along with a handful of his closest business associates and several of Emma's friends from the diner. Trevor leaned against a pillar at the back of the chapel, his presence like a storm cloud threatening rain. Jonathan had been forced to invite him to avoid suspicion, but his half-brother's smirk and whispered comments to his companion made Emma's skin crawl. As Jonathan slipped the wedding ring onto her finger, Emma felt a shiver that had nothing to do with nervousness. His hands were warm and steady, and when he looked into her eyes, she saw something that made her heart skip a beat. This might have started as a business arrangement, but there was something else growing between them, something neither of them had expected. The kiss that sealed their marriage was gentle but electric, and Emma felt a jolt of connection that went far beyond the physical. When they broke apart, she saw surprise in Jonathan's grey eyes, as if he'd felt it too. The reception was held in a private dining room at the Harborview Hotel, elegant but intimate. Emma moved through the evening feeling like she was living someone else's life, but Jonathan stayed close, his hand on her waist, his presence a steadying anchor in the overwhelming newness of everything. Trevor approached them during the cocktail hour, a glass of champagne in his hand and malice in his eyes. "Well, well, the happy couple," he said, his voice dripping with false warmth. "Emma, you certainly landed on your feet, from serving tables to sterling wife in less than a month. That's got to be some kind of record." "Trevor," Jonathan warned, his voice low and dangerous. "Oh, come on, brother. We're all family now." Trevor's smile was sharp as a blade. "I'm just wondering how long it'll be before the grieving widow starts making her plans." After all, we all know poor Jonathan isn't exactly built for the long haul these days. The words hung in the air like poison. Emma felt her face burn with humiliation as nearby guests turned to stare, their expressions ranging from curiosity to pity. She wanted to run, to hide from the knowing looks and whispered speculation, but Jonathan's arm tightened around her waist. "You're disgusting," Emma said, her voice carrying clearly across the room. "A Jonathan is worth 10 of you, and if you can't see that, you're not just cruel, you're pathetic." Trevor's smile faltered, but before he could respond, Emma continued, "I didn't marry Jonathan for his money. I married him because he's the most honorable man I've ever met, and if you think I'd ever look twice at a shallow, worthless excuse for a human being like you, you're even stupider than you look." The room had gone completely quiet. Trevor's face flushed red with rage and embarrassment, but before he could respond, Jonathan stepped forward. "The only thing pathetic here is you, Trevor. You've never built anything, never earned anything, never been anything but a disappointment to everyone who's ever had the misfortune of knowing you." Emma sees what you really are, a parasite who feeds on other people's success because you have nothing of your own worth defending. The two brothers stared at each other for a long moment before Trevor finally looked away, his bravado crumbling. "Crystal clear," he muttered, and disappeared back into the crowd. Jonathan turned to Emma, his eyes soft with something that might have been admiration. "Boy, you didn't have to defend me like that." "Yes, I did," Emma said, surprised by the conviction in her own voice. "You're my husband now. That means we defend each other." Something shifted in Jonathan's expression, a wall coming down behind his eyes. He leaned down and kissed her forehead, a gesture so tender it made her heart ache. "Thank you," he whispered against her skin. As the evening wound down, Emma found herself on the hotel's terrace, looking out over Boston Harbor. The water stretched endlessly into the darkness, dotted with the lights of distant ships, and she felt suddenly overwhelmed by the magnitude of what she'd just done. Jonathan joined her, loosening his tie as he came to stand beside her at the railing. "Regrets?" he asked quietly. Emma considered the question seriously. "No," she said finally. "Scared, yes. Overwhelmed, definitely, but no regrets." "Good," Jonathan said, and she heard relief in his voice. "Because I have to tell you something. What Trevor said in there about planning for after I'm gone, it got to me. Not because I think you would, but because I realized I don't want you to. I don't want this to be just about producing an heir anymore." Emma turned to look at him, her heart racing. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I want this to be real, Emma. I want to be a real husband to you, not just a means to an end. I know that wasn't our deal, and if you're not interested, I'll understand. But I had to tell you." Emma felt tears prick her eyes. Over the past 3 weeks, she'd found herself falling for this complex, wounded man, but she'd been afraid to hope he felt the same way. "I want that too," she whispered. "I was afraid you'd think I was just some gold digger trying to change the terms of our agreement." Jonathan cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away the tears she didn't realize she'd shed. "You're nothing like a gold digger, Emma Sterling. You're brave and beautiful and stronger than you know. And somehow, impossibly, you're mine." When he kissed her, it wasn't the gentle, restrained kiss from the ceremony. This was hungry, desperate, full of weeks of suppressed longing and the knowledge that their time together might be shorter than either of them wanted. They made love that night, with a passion that surprised them both. Jonathan had expected their arrangement to be clinical, businesslike, but there was nothing cold about the way Emma responded to his touch, nothing calculated about the way she whispered his name in the darkness. For the first time since his diagnosis, Jonathan felt truly alive. Emma's hands on his body chased away the shadow of death that had been hanging over him, replacing fear with something infinitely more powerful: love. The months that followed were a revelation for both of them. Jonathan delegated more responsibilities at work, spending his mornings with Emma, teaching her about his business empire, sharing his vision for Sterling Industries' future. She proved to have a brilliant mind for strategy and an intuitive understanding of people that served her well in the corporate world. Emma left her jobs at the diner and the data entry company, but not before ensuring that her replacements were people who desperately needed the work. She threw herself into learning about Jonathan's world, attending board meetings and charity functions with a natural grace that impressed even his most cynical associates. But it was the quiet moments that meant the most to both of them. Evenings spent talking on their penthouse terrace, lazy Sunday mornings in bed with coffee and the newspaper, the way Emma would absently massage Jonathan's temples when his headaches grew severe. They were falling in love, slowly and completely, in a way neither of them had expected when they'd agreed to their unconventional arrangement. Lucy thrived at her new private school, her grades earning her early acceptance to Harvard with a full scholarship. Emma's father received the best physical therapy money could buy, regaining enough mobility to walk short distances with a cane. The 3-bedroom house in Southie was replaced by a beautiful brownstone in Back Bay, close enough to Jonathan's penthouse that Emma could easily visit her family whenever she wanted. The pregnancy test showed positive on a cold February morning, just 4 months after their wedding. Emma stared at the 2 pink lines for a full minute before she trusted herself to move, her heart pounding with a mixture of joy and terror. She found Jonathan in his study, reviewing quarterly reports with the focused intensity that had built his empire. When she appeared in the doorway, he looked up with the smile that had become as essential to her as breathing. What's up?" he asked, setting down his papers. Emma crossed the room and placed the test on his desk, her hands trembling slightly. "We did it." Jonathan stared at the test for a moment that stretched into eternity. Then he looked up at Emma, and she saw something break open in his eyes, joy so profound it took her breath away. "Really?" he whispered. "Really?" Jonathan stood and crossed to her, pulling her into his arms with a gentleness that spoke of wonder and reverence. "Emma," he breathed against her hair. "My God, Emma, we're having a baby." She felt him tremble against her, and when he pulled back to look at her face, there were tears in his eyes. "I love you," he said, the words tumbling out like they'd been locked away too long. "And I know that wasn't part of our deal, but I love you so much it terrifies me." "I love you too," Emma whispered back, her own tears falling freely now. "I think I started falling for you the moment you helped me clean up that broken glass." They held each other in the morning light streaming through his office windows, 2 people who had found something neither of them had been looking for, a love that felt strong enough to conquer anything, even time itself. But even as they celebrated their miracle, the shadow of Jonathan's illness lurked at the edges of their happiness. His episodes were growing more frequent and severe, sometimes leaving him unconscious for minutes at a time. His hands shook constantly now, and Emma had started to notice the way he sometimes struggled to find words, the way his coordination seemed to deteriorate a little more each day. Dr. Richardson had been clear from the beginning. The progression was inevitable and accelerating. Jonathan had perhaps 6 months left, maybe less. The knowledge sat between them like a constant ache, unspoken but ever present. Emma was in her 2nd trimester when she started to notice things that didn't add up. Jonathan would disappear for hours at a time, claiming business meetings that his assistant Rebecca knew nothing about. There were phone calls he would take in private, conversations that would leave him pale and shaken. Most troubling of all, his medical appointments seemed to happen far more frequently than Dr. Richardson had originally indicated would be necessary. One afternoon in late spring, Emma decided she couldn't stand the uncertainty anymore. She followed Jonathan to his appointment with Dr. Richardson, parking across the street from the medical center and waiting in her car like some kind of private investigator. What she saw made her blood run cold. Trevor emerged from the building just 15 minutes before Jonathan was scheduled to arrive, a satisfied smirk on his face as he climbed into his Porsche. Emma's mind raced with possibilities, none of them good. That evening, she confronted Jonathan about what she'd seen. "Why was Trevor at your doctor's office?" she asked, cornering him in their bedroom as he prepared for bed. Jonathan froze, his face going carefully blank in a way that told her he was hiding something. "I don't know what you mean." "Don't lie to me, Jonathan. I saw him leaving Dr. Richardson's building this afternoon." "What's going on?" "Nothing's going on," Jonathan said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Trevor probably has his own medical issues." It's not uncommon for wealthy families to use the same doctors. Emma wanted to believe him, but something in his manner made her doubt. Over the following days, she found herself paying closer attention to the small details of Jonathan's condition, looking for signs that something wasn't adding up. The episodes were certainly real. She'd witnessed them herself, had held Jonathan during the worst of them. But there were inconsistencies that nagged at her. Sometimes he seemed to recover too quickly from what should have been debilitating attacks. Other times, his symptoms didn't quite match what she'd researched about neurodegenerative diseases. It was Rebecca, Jonathan's fiercely loyal assistant, who finally gave Emma the piece of the puzzle she needed. During a casual conversation about Jonathan's schedule, Rebecca mentioned that Trevor had been asking a lot of questions about Jonathan's medical appointments, even trying to bribe her for information about his condition. "It's strange," Rebecca said, frowning. "He's never shown interest in Jonathan's health before. If anything, he's always seemed to hope Jonathan would work himself to death." That night, Emma made a decision that would change everything. She hired her own private investigator, a discreet professional named Patricia Wells, who specialized in corporate espionage and family disputes. If Trevor was involved in something sinister, Emma was going to find out what. The truth, when it came, was more devastating than Emma had imagined possible. Patricia's investigation revealed a web of corruption that went straight to the heart of Jonathan's medical care. Dr. Richardson had been taking substantial payments from Trevor for over a year, falsifying test results and fabricating a terminal diagnosis that didn't exist. The real Jonathan Sterling wasn't dying at all. His symptoms were the result of carefully administered drugs that Dr. Richardson had been prescribing, medications that mimicked neurodegenerative disease while slowly poisoning Jonathan's system. Trevor's plan was diabolical in its elegance. Convince Jonathan he was dying, watch him make increasingly desperate decisions, then step in to claim the Sterling Empire when Jonathan's supposed illness drove him to suicide or reckless behavior that would destroy his credibility. Emma sat in her car outside Patricia's office, staring at the damning evidence in her hands, bank records showing regular payments from Trevor to Dr. Richardson, falsified medical reports, even recorded conversations between the conspirators discussing the progression of their treatment plan. Her husband wasn't dying. The man she'd fallen desperately in love with had been slowly poisoned by his own brother, led to believe he had months to live when he actually had decades ahead of him. The relief was overwhelming, but so was the rage. Trevor had orchestrated their entire relationship. He'd counted on Jonathan's desperation to drive him into a hasty marriage with someone unsuitable, someone Trevor could manipulate or eliminate after Jonathan's convenient death. What he hadn't counted on was Emma's intelligence, her loyalty, or the genuine love that had grown between her and Jonathan. Emma drove home with her mind racing, trying to figure out the best way to handle the devastating news. Jonathan had been living under a death sentence for almost a year, making decisions based on a lie that had shaped every aspect of their relationship. How do you tell someone that their terminal illness is a fabrication, that their own brother has been slowly poisoning them? She found Jonathan in his study, looking pale and drawn after another severe episode on that afternoon. The sight of him, weakened by months of Trevor's poison, made Emma's heart clench with a mixture of love and fury. "Jonathan," she said, closing the door behind her. "We need to talk." He looked up from his computer, concern flickering in his grey eyes. "What's wrong? You look upset." Emma crossed to his desk and spread out the evidence Patricia had gathered. "You're not dying, Jonathan." "You never were." For a moment, he just stared at the papers, confusion replacing concern on his features. "What are you talking about?" "Trevor has been paying Dr. Richardson to poison you. The medications you've been taking, the ones that are supposed to help with your symptoms, they're what's been making you sick. There's no neurodegenerative disease, Jonathan." "There never was." The color drained from Jonathan's face as he picked up the bank records, scanning the evidence of his brother's betrayal. Emma watched as understanding dawned in his eyes, followed quickly by a rage so pure it was almost frightening. "Trevor did this," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "He's been killing me slowly, making me think I was dying so I'd make desperate decisions." "And it worked," Emma said gently. "You married me because you thought you needed an heir before you died. Trevor probably thought he could manipulate me after you were gone, or that I'd be so grateful for the inheritance I wouldn't ask questions about how you died." Jonathan stood abruptly, pacing to the window with an energy she hadn't seen in him for months. He miscalculated. "Yes, he did. He didn't count on us actually falling in love. He didn't count on me being smart enough to investigate. And he definitely didn't count on me being willing to fight for you." Jonathan turned to look at her, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "You saved my life, Emma. Literally saved my life. We saved each other," she said, crossing to take his hands. "The question now is what we do about Trevor." Jonathan's expression hardened, the vulnerability of moments before replaced by the steely determination that had built his empire. "We destroy him. Completely and utterly. He tried to murder me, Emma. He's not getting away with this." The confrontation with Trevor took place 5 days later in the boardroom of Sterling Industries. Jonathan had called an emergency board meeting, ostensibly to discuss the future of the company given his medical condition. Trevor arrived looking confident and smug, probably expecting Jonathan to announce his retirement or worse. Instead, he found Jonathan looking healthier than he had in months, flanked by Emma and a team of corporate lawyers. The conference table was covered with evidence, bank records, falsified medical files, recorded conversations, and sworn affidavits from Dr. Richardson himself, who had confessed to everything in exchange for immunity from prosecution. "Trevor," Jonathan said, his voice calm but deadly, "sit down. We have things to discuss." Trevor's confidence faltered as he took in the scene, his eyes darting from the evidence to Jonathan's face. "What's all this about?" "It's about attempted murder," Emma said, her voice clear and strong. "It's about fraud, conspiracy, and the fact that you're going to prison for a very long time. The next 2 hours were a masterclass in destruction." Jonathan methodically laid out the evidence of Trevor's betrayal, each piece of proof another nail in his brother's coffin. Trevor tried to bluster, to deny, to claim he was being framed, but the evidence was overwhelming. The board members sat in stunned silence as the full scope of Trevor's treachery was revealed. By the time Jonathan finished, Trevor was pale and sweating, his usual arrogance replaced by the desperate look of a trapped animal. "You can't prove anything," Trevor said, his voice cracking. "This is all circumstantial." Jonathan smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Actually, we can prove everything. Dr. Richardson has already confessed and agreed to testify against you in exchange for a reduced sentence. He's given us chapter and verse on your whole operation." Trevor's face crumpled as the reality of his situation sank in. "And Jonathan, you have to understand, I never meant for it to go this far. I just wanted what was rightfully mine." "Rightfully yours?" Jonathan's voice was incredulous. "You tried to kill me, Trevor. You poisoned me for months, made me believe I was dying. You destroyed my faith in my own body, made me live in terror of death. There's nothing rightful about any of this." The aftermath was swift and brutal. Trevor was arrested on charges of attempted murder, fraud, and conspiracy. Dr. Richardson lost his medical license and faced his own criminal charges. The scandal rocked Boston's elite social circles, but Jonathan found he didn't care about the whispers and speculation. What mattered was that he was free, free from the shadow of death, free from his brother's poison, free to build a real life with Emma and their unborn child. The baby was born on a perfect autumn morning, a healthy boy with Jonathan's grey eyes and Emma's determined chin. They named him James, after Jonathan's grandfather who had founded Sterling Industries over a century ago. As Jonathan held his son for the first time, Emma beside him in the hospital bed, he felt a peace he'd never known. The Sterling empire would continue, not because he'd desperately married a stranger to produce an heir, but because he'd found real love with a remarkable woman who'd saved his life in every way that mattered. "He's perfect," Emma whispered, touching their son's tiny hand. "He's ours," Jonathan replied, and the word carried the weight of everything they'd overcome together. They returned to their penthouse overlooking Boston Harbor, no longer the cold, lonely space it had been when Jonathan thought he was dying, but a warm home filled with love and laughter. Lucy graduated valedictorian from her private school and started at Harvard that fall, visiting every weekend to dote on her nephew. Emma's father regained enough mobility to play with his grandson, his joy at having a grandchild bringing light back to his eyes after years of pain. Jonathan threw himself into rebuilding what Trevor's betrayal had damaged, but he did it with Emma as his true partner. She proved to have a brilliant mind for business strategy and an intuitive understanding of people that complemented his own skills perfectly. Together, they transformed Sterling Industries from a cold corporate machine into a company known for its innovation, integrity, and commitment to its employees. Trevor served 12 years in federal prison for attempted murder and fraud. When he was released, broken and forgotten, he found that the world he'd tried so hard to claim had moved on without him. The Sterling name, once his obsession, was no longer within his reach. Dr. Richardson lost everything: his practice, his reputation, his freedom. The medical community ostracized him completely, and he spent his remaining years as a cautionary tale about the dangers of greed and corruption. But for Jonathan and Emma, justice was less important than joy. They had found something neither of them had been looking for when they entered into their unconventional arrangement, a love story that would endure for generations. On their 10th wedding anniversary, they renewed their vows in the same chapel where they'd first pledged themselves to each other. This time, there were no doubts, no secrets, no hidden agendas, just two people who had chosen each other again and again, through deception and truth, through fear and hope, through all the challenges that life had thrown at them. As they danced at their anniversary celebration, Jonathan pulled Emma close and whispered in her ear, "Thank you for spilling wine on me that night." Emma laughed, the sound as bright and beautiful as it had been in that ballroom years ago. "Thank you for not having me arrested." "Never," Jonathan said, spinning her around the dance floor as their family and friends looked on. "You're stuck with me forever." "Promise?" Emma asked, her eyes sparkling with mischief and love. "Promise," Jonathan replied, sealing it with a kiss that tasted like hope and forever. 20 years later, Jonathan Sterling sat in his study, not reviewing contracts or planning acquisitions, but helping his son James with a high school history project about family businesses. At 20, James had inherited his father's strategic mind and his mother's compassionate heart, a combination that both delighted and humbled his parents. "Dad, why did Uncle Trevor try to kill you?" James asked, looking up from his laptop with the directness that only teenagers possess. Jonathan set down his pen and considered his answer carefully. James knew the basic story, that his uncle had poisoned his father and that his mother had exposed the plot, but not the full scope of betrayal and attempted murder that had shaped his parents' early relationship. Sometimes people do terrible things when they want something very badly, Jonathan said finally. Trevor wanted control of Sterling Industries, so he tried to eliminate me to get it. But Mom stopped him. "Your mother saved me in every way a person can be saved," Jonathan said, glancing toward the kitchen where Emma was preparing dinner, her laughter mixing with Lucy's voice as she told stories about her new job as a federal prosecutor. James nodded solemnly, processing this information with the seriousness he brought to everything. "Good. I like having you alive, Dad." Jonathan laughed, pulling his son into a hug. "I like being alive too, son. Very much." As Emma called them for dinner, Jonathan realized that Trevor had been right about one thing. He had been dying before Emma came into his life. Not from some mysterious neurodegenerative disease, but from loneliness, from the empty pursuit of success without purpose, from a life lived without love. Emma had given him more than an heir to carry on the Sterling name. She'd given him hope, joy, a reason to fight for every moment. She'd shown him what it meant to be truly alive. That night, as they put James to bed and settled into their own room overlooking the harbor that had brought them together, Emma curled up against Jonathan's side with the easy intimacy of a love that had been tested and proven true. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked, her voice soft in the darkness. "The way we started, I mean, would you have wanted to meet differently?" Jonathan considered the question seriously. "I think we met exactly when and how we were supposed to," he said finally. "Maybe if I hadn't thought I was dying, I would have been too proud to approach a waitress from Southie. Maybe if you hadn't been desperate to help your family, you would have been too smart to trust a billionaire's crazy proposal. So you think Trevor accidentally did us a favor? I think Trevor gave us the push we needed to find each other. The rest, the love, the trust, the choice to build a life together, that was all us." Emma smiled against his chest. "I love our story, even the messy parts. Especially the messy parts," Jonathan agreed, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "They're what make it real." As sleep pulled them under, Jonathan reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. He'd started out looking for an heir and found a soulmate. He'd thought he was dying and discovered what it truly meant to live. He'd believed he needed to secure his legacy and learned that the most important legacy was love itself. Emma stirred beside him, and even in sleep, she moved closer to his warmth. Jonathan tightened his arms around her, filled with gratitude for the spilled wine that had brought them together, for the conspiracy that had nearly torn them apart, and for the love that had conquered everything in between. The Sterling Empire would endure, not because Jonathan had desperately produced an heir, but because he and Emma had built something worth passing on, a company guided by integrity, a family bound by love, and a legacy that would outlast any building bearing their name. In the morning, there would be new challenges, new opportunities, new adventures for the Sterling family to face together. But tonight, Jonathan Sterling slept peacefully beside the woman who had saved his life, secure in the knowledge that he had found something more valuable than any empire, a love that could conquer even death itself. The city of Boston glittered beyond their windows, full of promise and possibility, while inside their home, the greatest love story ever told continued to unfold, one precious day at a time. Years turned into decades, and the Sterling legacy grew beyond anything Jonathan had ever imagined. James graduated from Harvard Business School and joined the company, bringing fresh ideas and innovative approaches that propelled Sterling Industries into new markets and technologies. Emma's influence could be seen in every aspect of the business, from their groundbreaking employee benefits programs to their commitment to sustainable development. Lucy became one of the most respected federal prosecutors in the country, specializing in corporate crime and fraud. She never forgot how her sister's courage had saved not just Jonathan's life, but their entire family's future. Emma's father lived to see his grandson graduate from college, passing away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 78, surrounded by the family that Emma's sacrifice had made possible. Trevor, meanwhile, faded into obscurity. After his release from prison, he struggled to find work, his name forever associated with one of the most shocking betrayals in Boston business history. He eventually moved to a small town in Maine, where he lived quietly under an assumed name, a broken man who had gambled everything on greed and lost spectacularly. Dr. Richardson never practiced medicine again. The scandal destroyed not only his career but his personal life as well. His wife divorced him, his children refused to speak to him, and he spent his final years in a small apartment, haunted by the knowledge that his greed had nearly destroyed one of Boston's most respected families. But the true measure of Jonathan and Emma's triumph wasn't in their enemies' downfall. It was in the love they'd built together, the family they'd created, and the legacy they were passing on to the next generation. On their 25th wedding anniversary, as they stood on the terrace of their penthouse watching the sun set over Boston Harbor, Emma slipped her hand into Jonathan's and marveled at how far they'd come. "Do you remember what you said to me that first night in Murphy's Corner?" she asked. Jonathan smiled, his gray eyes as bright as they'd been when he was a young man desperate for an heir. "I said a lot of things that night. Most of them crazy. You said you needed someone real, someone you could trust. I did. And I was right. I needed you, Emma Sterling. I just didn't know how much until I almost lost you." "You never lost me," Emma said, standing on her tiptoes to kiss him. "From the moment I saw you laughing instead of screaming about that spilled wine, I knew you were different. I knew you were worth fighting for. Even when you thought I was dying. Especially then. Love doesn't calculate the odds, Jonathan. It just loves." As the stars appeared over the harbor, they made their way inside to the anniversary party their children had organized. James was there with his wife and their twin daughters, Lucy with her husband and teenage son, and dozens of friends and colleagues who had become family over the years. But before they joined the celebration, Jonathan pulled Emma aside for one last private moment. "I need you to know something," he said, his voice serious despite the joy of the evening. "When Trevor was poisoning me, when I thought I was dying, the hardest part wasn't facing death. It was the thought that I might leave this world without ever having truly lived, without ever having loved someone the way I love you." Emma's eyes filled with tears. "Jonathan, let me finish. You didn't just save my life that day when you uncovered Trevor's plot. You saved me every day for 25 years. You made me into the man I was meant to be. You gave me everything, a family, a purpose, a reason to get up every morning and try to be worthy of your love. You've always been worthy," Emma whispered. "From that very first night, when you could have had me fired but chose to help me clean up the mess instead. That's when I knew who you really were." They held each other in the doorway between their private world and the celebration beyond, two people who had found something rare and precious in the most unlikely circumstances. "Ready to face our adoring public?" Jonathan asked, gesturing toward the party. "As long as I'm facing them with you," Emma replied. Hand in hand, they walked into their anniversary celebration, surrounded by the love they'd built together and the family they'd created, from nothing more than a desperate proposal and a spilled glass of wine. The years that followed brought new challenges and new joys. Sterling Industries expanded globally, becoming a leader in sustainable development and ethical business practices. James proved to be a worthy successor to his father, bringing innovation and integrity to every project he undertook. Emma's influence could be seen in every aspect of the company's culture, from their industry-leading employee benefits to their commitment to community development. Their grandchildren grew up knowing the story of how their grandparents met, the clumsy waitress and the dying billionaire who found love in the most unlikely circumstances. It became family legend, told and retold at holiday gatherings and bedtime stories, a reminder that love could triumph over any obstacle when it was real and true. But perhaps the most remarkable part of Jonathan and Emma's story was how it continued to inspire others. The Sterling Foundation, established in their name, provided scholarships for working-class students and funding for medical research into rare diseases. They never forgot where they came from or how precious their second chance had been. As Jonathan approached his 70th birthday, his hair silver but his mind as sharp as ever, he often reflected on the twist of fate that had brought Emma into his life. If Trevor hadn't tried to poison him, if he hadn't believed he was dying, if Emma hadn't been working that catering job that night, would they ever have found each other? He liked to think they would have somehow. Love, he'd learned, had a way of finding its path even through the most impossible circumstances. On the night of his 70th birthday, surrounded by 4 generations of family in the same ballroom where he and Emma had first met, Jonathan stood to make a toast. 45 years ago, he began, his voice carrying clearly across the room, I thought my life was ending. I was wrong. It was just beginning. Because that was the night I met a young woman who taught me that love isn't about desperation or deals or trying to control the future. Love is about finding someone who sees your soul and chooses to cherish it, someone who will fight for you even when you've given up fighting for yourself. He raised his glass toward Emma, who sat at the head table with tears in her eyes. To Emma Sterling, who saved my life in every way a life can be saved. To the greatest love story ever told, not because it was perfect, but because it was real. The room erupted in applause, but Jonathan only had eyes for Emma as she stood and crossed to him, just as she had on that night decades ago when she'd spilled wine on his shirt and changed their lives forever. I love you, she whispered, her words meant for him alone. I love you too, he replied. Always and forever. As they kissed in front of their family and friends, surrounded by the life they'd built together, it was impossible not to believe in the power of love to transform everything it touches. Their story had begun with deception and desperation, but it had become something beautiful and lasting and true. And in the end, that's what the greatest love stories always are, not perfect fairy tales, but real human dramas where love conquers all the obstacles that life can throw in its path, where 2 souls find each other against impossible odds and choose, again and again, to build something beautiful together. The story of Jonathan and Emma Sterling became the stuff of legend in Boston's business circles, but to them, it was simply their life, messy and complicated and absolutely perfect in all the ways that mattered. And if you listened carefully on quiet nights when the harbor fog rolled in over the city, you could almost hear the echo of laughter from that long-ago evening when a clumsy waitress and a desperate billionaire collided in a shower of broken glass and spilled wine, and found something more precious than all the money in the world. They found forever. That, my friends, is how a single moment of clumsiness became the foundation of the greatest love story ever told. A reminder that sometimes our darkest moments lead us to our brightest futures, that love really can conquer death itself when it's built on truth and trust and the courage to fight for what matters most. If this story reminded you that miracles happen every day, that hope exists even in the deepest darkness, that love truly can transform any life it touches, then hit that subscribe button below and join our community of believers in the extraordinary power of ordinary moments to change everything. Because everyone deserves a love story this powerful. Everyone deserves to believe in forever. And everyone deserves to know that no matter how dark things get, love always, always finds a way. Until next time, keep believing in the impossible. Keep looking for the extraordinary in the ordinary. And keep your heart open to the magic that surrounds us all.